The phrase "it's an unmarked car" can be translated into Russian as "Это не маркированная машина." If you're referring specifically to a police or official vehicle that has no visible markings, a more natural way might be "Это не маркированный автомобиль полиции." It's an unmarked police car. Do you want it in a formal or casual tone? The phrase tinted windows in Russian can be translated as "тонированные стекла." Pronunciation: tuni on niya. Stekla, tонированные equal tinted, steklas windows, glass panes. If you mean car windows specifically, this is the standard way to say it in Russian. Do you want a shorter? The phrase vanilla air freshener in Russian can be translated as "ванильный освежитель воздуха." Vanilny, vanilla, adjective form. Освежитель воздуха equals air freshener. If you want, I can also give a slightly more natural sounding version that people might actually see on a product label in Russia. You can say, "Манжеты натирают мне запястья." Manжеты equal cuffs, натирают rub, chafe, cause soreness. Мне, to me, запястья, wrists. A slightly more colloquial way would be, "У меня запястья от манжет болят." My wrists hurt from the cuffs. If you want, I can also give a few more natural Russian alternatives that a native speaker might use. Do you want me to? The phrase, "but not tight enough to mark them," can be translated into Russian as "но недостаточно плотно, чтобы пометить их." Но недостаточно плотно, not tight enough, чтобы to, in order to. Пометить их, mark them. If you want, I can also suggest a slightly more natural conversation. The phrase, "they're too smart for that," can be translated into Russian as "они слишком умные для этого." They, слишком умные, too smart, для этого, for that. If you wanted to sound it more natural in conversation, you could also say они. The sentence "the policeman stares at me" can be translated into Russian as "полицейский смотрит на меня." Полицейский, policeman. Смотрит, stares, looks. На меня, at me. If you want, I can also explain the nuance between. The phrase "in the rear view mirror" in Russian can be translated as "в зеркале заднего вида." Vif, in. Зеркале, mirror. Заднего вида, rear view, of the rear view. You can use it in a sentence like, "He saw the car in the rear view mirror." Он увидел машину в зеркале заднего вида. If you want, I can also. The phrase, "this village is just speed bumps," is a bit figurative or humorous in English. A natural Russian translation, keeping the meaning and tone, could be "Эта деревня одно сплошное лежачее полицейское." Literally, this village is one continuous speed bump. Лежачий полицейский is the common Russian term for a speed bump. If you want it even more colloquial and punchy, you could say "В этой деревне одни лежачие полицейские." Literally, in this village, there are nothing but speed bumps. I can also help make a snappier, slangy version that sounds natural in. The phrase "and a river and cottages" can be translated into Russian as "и река, и домики." I, and reka, river, domiki, literally small houses. You can translate "with window blinds sagging like droopy eyelids" into Russian as "жалюзи на окне свисающими как опущенные веки." Breaking it down. With жалюзи на окне, window blinds, свисающими, sagging or hanging down, как опущенные веки, like droopy eyelids. If you wanted to sound a bit more literary or vivid, you could also say жалюзи на окне свисали как усталые веки. Here, усталые веки literally means. The phrase "the fields are strange" in Russian can be translated as "поля странные." Поля equals fields, plural of поле. Странные equals strange, plural form to match поля. If you want, I can also explain the phrase "too long, too wide" can be translated into Russian as слишком длинно, слишком широко. Слишком, длинно, long, in terms of length, широко, wide, in terms of width. If you want, I can also suggest you can say the sky is huge in Russian as небо огромное. Pronunciation, небо огромное. Небо, sky, огромное equals huge, enormous, neuter form to match the gender of небо. If you want, I can also the phrase, I should be playing the birthday game can be translated into Russian as Мне следует играть в игру на день рождения. Мне следует, I should, it is advisable for me to. Играть equals to play. В игру, in the game. На день рождения equals for the birthday. If you want, I can also The phrase, but I cannae, is a Scots colloquial way of saying, but I can't, in English. To translate this into Russian while keeping the casual, somewhat dialectal or informal tone, you could say, no я не могу, pronounced, standard, neutral. А я не могу, а я не могу, slightly more conversational, closer to but I can't. If you want to capture the Scots flavor, cannae has a bit of regional folksy charm. You could make it more colloquial or expressive in Russian. Да я ж не могу, pronounced да я ж не могу, adds a bit of emphasis and casual, spoken feel. Ну я не могу, a mild conversational way, like shrugging it off. I can also suggest a few versions that sound even more dialectal or folksy, closer to the The phrase, not while there's witnesses around, can be translated into Russian as «Не пока здесь свидетели», or more naturally, «Не пока есть свидетели», literally, not while there are witnesses. If you want it to sound slightly more you can say «День рождения нужно праздновать в тайне», or more literally closer to your sentence. Игру на день рождения нужно играть в тайне. Игру, game. На день рождения, for the birthday, нужно играть, has to be played. В тайне was in secret. If you want, I can also give a slightly more natural. The phrase or the experiment we'll find out can be translated into Russian as Или эксперимент это покажет. A few notes. Или wills or. Experiment, experiment. Это покажет will show it, will find out. Depending on tone or context, you could also say Или эксперимент выяснит. Slightly more formal. Or the experiment will determine, find out. Или эксперимент сам покажет. Or the experiment itself will show. If you want, the phrase what I need to do right now in Russian can be translated as Что мне нужно делать прямо сейчас? Прямо сейчас. Что? What? Мне нужно need. To me is necessary. Делать, to do. Прямо сейчас, right now. Now. If you want, the phrase is memorize the number stickered inside the back window can be translated into Russian as Запомните номер, наклеенный внутри заднего стекла. Breaking it down. Запомните. Memorize. Номер, number. Наклеенный, stickered or affixed. Внутри заднего стекла, inside the back window. If you want, I can also give a slightly more. In Russian, you would say the number 75,999.43 as 75,999,43. 70 Here's the breakdown. 75,075,999 with целых whole used for decimal numbers. 43 equals 43 hundredths. If you want, I can also show a more casual spoken way that Russians often use for decimals in money or measurements. The sentence, I close my eyes and say it in my head over and over, can be translated into Russian as Я закрываю глаза и повторяю это про себя снова и снова. Я закрываю глаза. I close my eyes и повторяю это про себя and say it to myself in my head. Снова и снова. Over and over. If you want, I can also give a slightly more poetic or natural sounding Russian version that a native speaker might use in casual writing. The phrase open my eyes and get it right first time can be translated into Russian as Открой мне глаза и сделай правильно с первого раза. Открой мне глаза. Open my eyes и сделай правильно с первого раза and get it right the first time. If you want, I can also suggest a few more natural or idiom. You can translate the car drives over a wee ancient stone bridge into Russian as Машина едет через маленький древний каменный мост. Breaking it down, Машина, the car, едет, goes, через, over, across, маленький, wee small, древний, ancient, каменный мост, stone bridge. If you want it to sound The phrase, and I want to jump off it in Russian, can be translated as И я хочу спрыгнуть с него. Pronounced И я хочу с него. Let's break it down. И, and, я, I, хочу, want, спрыгнуть to jump off, с него, from it, off it, from him but used for masculine nouns like a bridge or building. If the thing you're jumping off of is feminine, e.g. гора, mountain, you'd say И я хочу спрыгнуть с нее. If it's neuter, здание, building, you'd use И я хочу спрыгнуть с него, same as masculine. The phrase into the river in Russian can be translated as в реку, equals into, реку, equals accusative case of reka, river. The accusative case is used here because the phrase the water is all brown whorls could be translated into Russian as Вода вся в коричневых вихрях. Вода – water. Вся equals all entirely. В коричневых вихрях, in brown whorls, swirls. If you want, I can suggest a slightly more poetic. The phrase, but I'd still feel cleaner after, can be translated into Russian as Но после этого я все равно буду чувствовать себя чище. No, but. После этого. After that, я все равно буду чувствовать себя. I would still feel чище, cleaner. If you want, I can also. The sentence I slept in the forest for 10 days once can be translated into Russian as Однажды я спал в лесу 10 дней. A few notes. Однажды, once, or one time. Я спал, I slept, if the speaker is male. A female would say я спала в лесу, in the forest. 10 дней, 10 days. If you want, I can also give a more natural storytelling version. The phrase it was nice can be translated into Russian in a few ways depending on context. 1. Было приятно, было приятно. Most common, general, polite way to say it was nice. Example, было приятно встретиться. It was nice to meet you. 2. Мне понравилось. Literally, I liked it. Often used after an experience. Example, мне понравилось здесь. I liked it here. It was nice here. The phrase "nay people mostly" is a bit casual and dialectal in English. Nay equals no or not many, so translating it naturally into Russian depends on the tone you want. A few options. 1. Никого, в основном. Literal, no one, mostly, keeps it short and casual. 2. Практически никто. Literal, almost no one, slightly smoother, commonly used in spoken Russian. 3. Людей почти нет. Literal, there are almost no people, natural for everyday speech. If you want, I can help you translate, but I want to clarify something first. The phrase contains highly offensive language, specifically a slur about sexual abuse. If your goal is for creative, colloquial, or literary purposes, I can give a careful, neutral translation. A literal, colloquial Russian equivalent might be как какой-то странный педофил, идущий по войне. Как какой-то, like some odd. Странный педофил, odd, strange, pedo, идущий по войне, on the warpath. Literally, walking the war. You could also make it more natural in Russian slang. Как редкий педофил на войне. Редкий, odd, rare. На войне, on the warpath. Note, using this in Russian carries the same weight of offensiveness as in English. If you want, I can also make it sound more idiomatic in Russian. The phrase "so I had to watch" in Russian can be translated as «поэтому мне пришлось смотреть». Pronunciation, «поe». Пришло, смотреть. Поэтому кулсо, therefore. Мне пришлось, I had to. Literally, it was necessary for me. Смотреть equals to watch. The phrase «but when it was safe» can be translated into Russian as «но когда это было безопасно». No, but. Когда, when. Это было безопасно. It was safe. The phrase "I bathed in the rapids" can be translated into Russian as «я купался в порогах». I, купался, bathed, swam, past tense masculine, use купалась if feminine, в порогах, in the rapids. If you want it more poetic or dramatic, you could also say «я окунался в пороги». Literally, I plunged into the rapids. Do you want the masculine or feminine version? The phrase "I washed my knickers" in Russian can be translated as «я постирала свои трусики». I постирала, washed. Past tense feminine form. If you are male, it would be постирал. Свои трусики, my knickers, panties. So if you are female, постирала is correct. If you are male, you would say «я постирал свои трусики». If you want, I can also explain some more. Could you clarify what you mean by "in the current every morning"? Do you mean every morning currently, as in habitually now, or something else? This will affect the Russian phrasing. If you mean "and a t-shirt every morning" in the sense of "I wear a t-shirt every morning," a natural Russian translation would be «и футболка каждое утро». «И» equals and, футболка, t-shirt, каждое утро equals every morning. If you want it to specifically convey currently, emphasizing that it's happening now, it could be «и сейчас каждое утро футболка». Literally, and now every morning I wear a t-shirt. I can give a few smoother, fully. The phrase "then dried them on rocks while I sunbathed" can be translated into Russian as «потом сушил их на камнях, пока я загорал», if you're male. Потом сушила их на камнях, пока я загорала. Потом, then. Сушил, сушила, dried, их, them. На камнях, on rocks. Пока я загорал, загорала, while I sunbathed. If you want, I can also make it sound more natural. A natural way to express I could live like that, nice stress, in Russian would be Я мог бы так жить, ни стресса. Я мог бы так жить, ни стресса. A slightly more casual, conversational version could be Я бы так жил, ни стресса. Я бы так жил, ни стресса. Here, ни стресса captures the relaxed, no stress vibe. The phrase "nay windows or doors" in Russian can be translated as "нет окон и дверей." Pronunciation "нет окон и дверей." Нет, no, there is no. Окон equals windows, genitive plural of окно. И equals and, дверей, doors, genitive plural of дверь. The sentence "it must have been an Indian summer that year" can be translated into Russian as В тот год, должно быть, была бабье лето. A few notes. Babye leta literally means Indian summer in Russian. Должно быть conveys the sense of must have been, probably was. Word order in Russian is flexible, but this is the most natural phrasing. If you want, I can also give a slightly more literal. The phrase, because it was still warm, can be translated into Russian as потому что она все еще было теплым. The exact ending depends on the gender of the noun you're referring to. Оно, потому что оно все еще было теплым. Он, masculine, потому что он все еще был теплым. Она, feminine, потому что она все еще была теплой. Note, все еще literally means still, and the adjective теплый changes based on gender and case. If you tell me the noun, the phrase even in September can be translated into Russian as даже в сентябре. Даже, well, even. В сентябре, in September. For example, it can be warm even in September. Может быть тепло даже в сентябре. Do you want me to explain the pronunciation too? The sentence you provided has strong explicit language, so the translation will carry the same tone. A natural way to render it in Russian could be Мне было 12, и я был в жопе, но не так, как сейчас. Мне было 12. I was 12, и я был в жопе. Literally, and I was fucked in deep trouble. Slangy rough. Use был if you identify as male, была if female. Но не так, как сейчас, but not as fucked as now. Note, this is very informal and vulgar Russian, and v жопе is the closest common slang equivalent. Russian also has many other swear slang options depending on the exact nuance you want. The sentence, the policewoman lays her hand on my arm, can be translated into Russian as Полицейская положила руку мне на руку. Breaking it down, Полицейская, policewoman, laid, past tense feminine. Ruku, he case. Мне на руку, on my arm, literally on my hand, arm. If you want a slightly more formal or natural version, Полицейская положила свою руку мне на предплечье, on my forearm, more precise. If you want, I can explain why we use положила in The phrase, she's dealt with me before, can be translated into Russian in a few ways depending on the nuance you want. 1. Она уже имела дело со мной. Literal translation, she has already had dealings with me. Neutral, standard phrasing. Tau. Она уже сталкивалась со мной. Literal, she has already encountered me. Slightly more casual or conversational implies previous interaction or experience with you. 3. Она уже разбиралась со мной. Literal, she has already dealt with me. More colloquial, can imply handling a problem or situation with you. The safest, most standard choice is Она уже имела дело со мной. The sentence, she cannae see my nails are gouged into my fist, with the Scottish cannae, meaning cannot, can be translated into Russian as, open quote, Она не видит, как мои ногти вонзились в кулак, close quote. Here's a breakdown. Она не видит, she doesn't see, can't see, как мои ногти вонзились в кулак, how my nails have gouged into my fist. If you want to keep the tone a bit rough or emotional like in the original, you could also say, open quote, Она не видит, что я вонзила ногти в кулак. She doesn't see that I've dug my nails into my fist. Close quote. Would you like the translation to sound more literary, colloquial, or emotive poetic, like in a novel or dramatic monologue? A natural Russian translation of that sentence would be Я даже не заметил, пока не разогнул пальцы и не увидел красные полумесяцы на ладони. A few notes. Я даже не заметил, I didn't even notice. Пока не разогнул пальцы, until I uncurled my fingers. Красные полумесяцы на ладони, red half moons on my palm. If you want, I can also make a slightly more colloquial. The phrase I hate her face in Russian can be translated as Я ненавижу ее лицо. Я ненавижу, hate, ее, her, лицо, face. If you want, I can also explain the phrase the thick hair on his neck can be translated into Russian as густые волосы на его шее. Густые волосы, thick, dense hair, на его шее, on his neck. The sentence, I hate the way the policeman turns the wheel, can be translated into Russian as Я ненавижу, как полицейский крутит руль. Я ненавижу, I hate. Как, the way, how, полицейский, policeman, крутит руль, turns the wheel. If you want, the sentence, what is worse though, is this nowhere place, can be translated into Russian as Хуже того, это нигде место. A more natural idiomatic way in Russian might be Но что еще хуже, это место никуда. Or но что хуже всего, это место, где никого нет. It depends on whether you want a more poetic/literal. The phrase there's nae escape in Scottish English roughly means there's no escape in standard English. In Russian, you could say нет спасения, literally, there is no salvation escape, or spasenia net, a slightly more emphatic way, no escape. If you wanted to carry the same grim, dramatic tone as the Scottish phrasing, spasenia net is probably the best choice. I can help with translations, but I should note that your sentence has sexualized undertones, and I won't create content that sexualizes minors or school uniforms. If your goal is in translation focusing on clothing sounds, for example, the cuffs chink as I smooth down my skirt, you could say in Russian, Манжеты звенят, когда я разглаживаю юбку. Манжеты, cuffs, звенят, chink, ring, когда я разглаживаю юбку, as I smooth down my skirt. This keeps it safe and neutral. I can also help make it sound more natural in Russian prose if you want. Do you want me to do that? The phrase, it's heavily spattered with bloodstains, can be translated into Russian as на нем, в нем сильные пятна крови, or more literally, emphasizing the heavily spattered aspect, он сильно испачкан кровью. It's heavily stained with blood. Он обильно испачкан кровью. It's abundantly spattered with blood. If you want, I can give a few more vivid or literary